just do it. Just
let me tell you, ridiculous amount of paper. I would start just winging it like Stacy. Mr. Walker, give us a hand sign when we're ready. Hello and welcome to Cognitions, Speaking the Unspeakable with JP and Stacy D. I am JP Craddock and sitting in again for Stacy D. Today we have the wonderful Carol Grant Hunter. Carol is a licensed clinical social worker and therapist with 35 plus years experience providing mental health treatment services. Carol, thank you for joining me on the show again today.
thank you for letting me be here.
Well, it's good to have you. Coming up on the show today, we have our question of the day, which is, what is LGBTQ plus? And there's some other letters after the plus. We're going to cover all of that. So that is coming up later on the show. Before we get to that, I want to do a little bit of mental health and illness in the news. Actually, before we get to that, Carol, did you have anything on your mind? How's Carol been doing? Because me and Stacy D, we do a check-in before we dive in. So,
okay,
is Carol, all right?
All things considered equal, and how I got to be on this show again today, I'm doing fine. But we're not going to talk about the part that comes between about how I got on the show.
To our listeners, Carol's talking about me giving her last minute notice to be on the show today, which is what Stacy D gave me.
Yeah, but you're supposed to treat your elders better.
Recording in progress.
I heard that, but she's older than me, so I guess I can't tell her that.
Yeah.
Okay. Mental health and illness in the news. This is Pride Month, and for Pride Month, Sesame Street has introduced its first ever gay couple with two dads. The episode is called Family Day, and so this is a way for them to normalize that some kids have two dads, some kids have two moms, and normalizing it can decrease some of those negative reactions that kids oftentimes have. Because, and Carol, you work with kids who are referred by the state as well. I work with multiple families who, there's two dads or two moms. And one of the things that comes up in therapy is the reaction from their peers when two moms show up at the school or when two dads show up at the school. And it can become unpleasant. It can become difficult. And so I like the idea of, addressing this kind of at the root, at the core, starting, when people are kids, starting when humans are, young and more open and receptive to diversity. So that's a wonderful thing. Carol, did you hear about the two dads on Sesame Street?
Oh, yes, I saw that. And I'm like you, Gerald. I believe in what one of the sisters said in a book that she wrote. The truth will set us free. So if we're talking about being free, in the real sense of the word. We just need to tell the truth. The truth has been around since the beginning of time. It was around in the Bible. So I don't know why we get all bent out of shape, but we do. But I think that the best way to approach anything is just to tell the truth. And with kids, you tell them as much as they can digest at their age. And then you just add on as they ask questions. You don't have to go into a whole dissertation, and you don't act like that's not anything. And you really don't say, don't talk to me about that, because that makes bad matters worse. And they want to have more information, and they're going to go ask somebody, and that could be the wrong somebody. So.
Right. Okay. I have another story that's good for Pride Month, because this is Pride Month. Raiders, NFL Raiders, Las Vegas Raiders football player Carl Nassib has made history. He is the first ever to disclose that he is gay while actively playing in the NFL. Because usually the players, they wait until after they retire, and then, they will say, I am gay, I'm homosexual. This young man, he said he had been waiting for, a time to release this, to be free, and say, hey, this is who I am. And he said that he hopes that there will come a day where this isn't such a big deal, that there has to be these whole, coming out disclosures and things like that. And hopefully our society will evolve to that point. Michael Sam was the first openly gay player to be drafted into the NFL back in 2014, but he was cut before he ever, got to play a regular season game. So another thing about this young man that is wonderful is he is donating $100,000 to the Trevor Project to prevent suicides among LGBTQ youth. And something that a lot of people are not aware of, and I definitely explain this to parents, is that period of time right after a kid discloses that they are homosexual, that they come out of the closet, that is when they are at the highest risk for suicidal ideations, suicide attempts. Because if it is met with a negative reaction, rejection, it can cause them to sink down into depression and they become suicidal. And so the Trevor Project, their mission is to support youth during that difficult time. So his donation is going to definitely help with reducing the chances, the likelihood, the incidence of suicide among LGBTQ youth. So I thought that was really good. Carol, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I applaud him for doing that, because I know it was difficult. And I applaud him for making that donation to that organization, because that's definitely needed. And I also have to give the NFL, I guess to give them their dues. They're supposed to be matching his funds. As far as the donation is concerned, the last thing I heard. Of course, I'm not a sports fan. Sports fans don't jump down my throat if I got it wrong. But I thought I heard that they were going to match those donations. But when it comes to the issue of sexuality, I think that we are so out of touch and out of time. And, having worked with children in, let me turn this phone off. Having worked with children in care and custody for years, and we've always dealt with a lot of dysfunction. But I personally, dealing with someone that's gay, to me, is a lot less problematic on a one-to-one basis than dealing with a pedophile. And so I'm wondering where our line for what's sexually appropriate and inappropriate is drawn, because we've got pedophiles all over the place. Catholic Church, you name it, they claim it. Maybe they don't. But if we don't look at sexuality as as a human thing and as something that is individual to the individual, then we set up a very a very, I don't even know what to say, how nice word to say it. We set up a situation where people feel that they have to go undercover and underground, and that is very traumatic for everybody concerned. And I think that homophobia is just as bad as any other type of phobia, and we need to work on that. Not just to work with the gay and the LGBTQ population, but to work with the homophobic population to accept the fact that this is the reality of the world.
Right, right. Absolutely. And so hopefully, um, as more athletes are feeling comfortable coming out of the closet, and his team it was reported that they were very supportive, but just more people in general, public figures. That's what young people need to see when it comes to their own internal struggles with, how do I handle this? How do I disclose this? Who do I tell? Who do I not tell? What is going to happen? Am I going to lose all of my friends? Are my parents going to reject me? And so it's important. And I like what you're saying, Carol, is that, whether it has to do with homophobia or racism and other forms of bigotry, we have to start knocking down these walls of division. Us being divided as humans only results in hurt and pain and chaos. And so it's time for society to move forward. All right. Now, Carol, this is my check-in for today. I had posted on our YouTube channel a video about Juneteenth, and I like to package the facts in a package of humor oftentimes. But you had saw the video and you had some thoughts on it. And so what were your thoughts on that Juneteenth video that I posted on the show's YouTube channel?
Well, to begin with, I thought you did a very good job as usual, and you're quite entertaining. Of course, I already knew that, but the viewers out there who have known you for 30 plus years may not know that. But anyway, that's an aside. But I had a couple of little things that I wanted to point out, because you had told me about this the segment that you were going to do on Pride, and I think that hopefully the information I can give is kind of going to be a segue into talking about what you're going to talk about with Pride, because I appreciate the fact that we have Juneteenth as a holiday. I'm not so happy that we only have one day, just like I'm not so happy that we have only 2 days, Martin Luther King and Juneteenth. And I'm not so happy that we have only 1 month in the year for Black history, and that's the shortest month of the year. But maybe I'm being difficult. I think that we shouldn't have to have all these, a day for these people, a month for this group. I think we should have inclusive history. I think that we should have something in the line of the 1619 Project. I think that we should go back and redo all our teaching materials from kindergarten up and be inclusive and tell the truth. And maybe we can set ourselves free someday in the future. But when we talked about Juneteenth, I wanted to just point out a couple of things that maybe didn't come out in your talk. One is that Juneteenth, although it freed the slaves the slaves in Texas finally realized that they were free. It didn't free the slaves in the whole United States, because once the South came back into the Union, slaves in the North and in the border states were not free. Emancipation was a temporary fix. It was like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. And it was only an order from the president. It wasn't a law. So he made this proclamation, which is why it's called a proclamation and not a law. So the laws weren't enacted to really give slaves their civil rights until after the end of the Civil War and after the
Recording in
put out there for
progress.
people to know. Slavery was only mandated to be unlawful in the states that were in succession from the Union. But there were four or five border states that did not apply to because they did not succeed from the Union because of economic and political reasons. And those states were Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia, Kentucky, and of course, yay, Missouri. Now, we won't talk about the Missouri Compromise in Kansas and everything, because that gets into something totally different. But Missouri came in as a slave state to balance out Kansas coming in as a free state. But these states stayed in the Union because of economic reasons and because they could maintain their slaves. So when the Emancipation Proclamation was proclaimed, it freed the slaves only in the states that were still in secession from the Union. With Texas being the state that was furthest from the furthest out and biggest, many slaveholders understood at some point in time that the South was probably losing the war. And they moved their slaves to Texas to avoid having them become free if the Union troops came through and freed their slaves. So slaves were moved in mass numbers to Texas to avoid them being constricted by the Union Army. And so it all goes back to politics and economics. It was about keeping as many slaves away from the Union as possible, as long as possible, and then keeping that news from them as long as possible. Because the news got to Texas that the Emancipation Proclamation had been passed before the soldiers got to Texas, and you know, your little very interesting tidbit on that. but in all honesty, thousands of slaves were still, hundreds of thousands of slaves were still not free, especially slaves in the northern states. And one of the main states where that was a problem was, of course, Maryland and Virginia, because of where the capital sits, and New York, because New York was the banking capital of the United States. New York owned, the banks in New York basically owned the South. All the money that was borrowed to buy the slaves and buy this and buy that. The South didn't have Bank of America and U.S. Bank and you know, Wells Fargo. They didn't have all that back then. So the major banks were in New York, and the major holders in those banks were Northerners, and they too had slaves. George Washington himself went through a convoluted, I can't even explain it. He went through a whole lot of outlaws in the northern states or the border states. So slavery only became officially outlawed with the passing of the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, but slaves were not citizens. So it took them to June 8th of 1868 for the 14th Amendment to be signed, and ratified, and passed, which granted citizenship, privileges and immunities, due process, and equal protection under the law. And then it took until February of 1870 for eligible voters, all male eligible voters, and I emphasize male eligible voters, be able to vote. All male citizens, females not, because the females didn't get to vote until the 19th Amendment was passed after the dawn of the 20th century.
Mhm.
So, but the important thing about the 14th Amendment is that citizenship rights, your due process, your privileges and immunities, all those things are things that I feel that the blacks had fought for a long time, but now we see that being a part of the pride community's fight too. So we've gone back over 150 years, and we're doing the same thing all over again. And that should not have to be, because those rights were granted, at least on paper, which is what we call de jure, by 1870. But here we are in 2021, still fighting for people to have due process, uh, privileges and immunity, and equal protection under the law. So that's my story.
Well, Carol, thank you so much, because one, this is history that is not taught in the schools. Our children are not taught this history. And on a university level, I think that they do a better job of teaching. You know, if you take Black history classes on a university level, they do a better job, but still not as thorough. And so thank you for filling in all those gaps.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I
What?
got to say one more thing.
Go ahead.
This is going to surprise you, I know. Until after Reconstruction, the Republican Party was the party of the Black man.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll just put that out there for
Yes, but because anybody who watches the show knows that I wouldn't be considered a fan of the Republican Party.
No.
That's the old Republican Party, Carol.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the old one wasn't too much different than the new one. When you listen to the things that I've said and some of the history that goes into what I've said, the old one wasn't too much better than the new one. The things that Thomas Jefferson did to get the Constitution in place to write that, they did a lot of scandalous stuff, because 3/5 of a person still sticks in my throat.
Yeah.
And that was the old Republican Party. That's not the new one.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but yeah, but it's just, I think most people believe that there's an image out there that all Black people are Democrats, and then the few Black people that are Republicans are kind of they're race traitors, you know, and gone over to the other side. But that was the party of Black people before
Yes.
the end of Reconstruction.
Well, and I know that at times Republicans will cite and try to accept some responsibility for the ending of slavery, and Lincoln was Republican. And so when I say that the Republican Party, yes, there's some similarities, some negative similarities that have carried over, but the stance of the Republican Party then compared to the current Republican Party, there's also some differences. And so I struggle
become more
with
sophisticated.
Yes. Okay. But thank you, Carol, for filling in all those gaps, because you know I put my video out, and you saw I was having fun in that video.
I was having fun watching it, but
my interpretation of how it all went down.
Well, I was getting ready to nominate you for Saturday Night Live, but they told me that was a process that I had to go through. So,
well, let me tell you, Carol, you are quite the historian. Like, whenever you have some history that you want to share with our listeners, you let me know, and we are going to have you on the show to share this history. Because, as you said, Black History Month needs to be more than just 1 month out of the year, because Black folks are here every month, every day. And, you know, our history needs to be taught, shared, and appreciated throughout the year. So when you got something you want to drop on us, Carol, you let me know.
Well, there's a list of books that I think that you might want to have your listeners think about reading, because there are a lot of good books being published by Black authors and about this subject that when I was in school at a predominantly Black college, we still didn't have access to, because we weren't accepted to have those things printed by the big presses like
Right.
Random House and places like that. So there are a lot of good books coming out now, and I think that you need to, if you're paying your taxes or not, you need to go to the library and take advantage of what the library has to offer. And they also have to offer, Mid-Continent Library has to offer a genealogy center. So you can go in there and trace your genealogy for free. You can almost be your own, Dr. Henry Louis Gates up to a point.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Well, see, you learned something to talk to me, Gerald.
That's why you here, Carol.
Unless if you don't call me early in the morning, I can get my mind together and then we can talk.
At the time, at 5 o'clock when I'm going to bed. Was it 5 o'clock or 7?
It was 7. I was up. I was up. I get up, I'm a country girl, so I get up early and do my exercise and do my meditation and stuff. But I was meditating and and I thought something must be wrong. I thought, who died? Because Gerald.
Because let me tell you, I'm not a morning person. If I'm calling early in the morning, it's because I haven't went to bed yet. So I was up working until 5, and then I went to the gym because I'm still trying to work off peach cobbler from the holiday. And so I was going to bed at 7 when I sent that. But thank you so much for being up, doing what country girls do, up and handling business at the crack of dawn.
Well, I don't have chickens anymore, so I had to get up and do something.
Right. Okay. Our question of the day, because this is Pride Month, and I was thinking maybe we should, kind of start with the basics, because a lot of people do not know what LGBTQ stands for. I know what LGBTQ stands for. What I was not aware of, and this acronym has grown over the years. It has gotten longer. I remember when it was just LGBT, and now there's Q. But I was thinking it might be good to provide a little education on what it even means. Okay. And so LGBTQ is actually LGBTTQQIAA. All right. So, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, two-spirit, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, and ally. And then on the plus side, there's more, which is pansexual, agender, genderqueer, bigender, gender variant, and pangender. So let's get into this and help everyone understand, because I myself learned a lot. I was not aware of all of the additional letters, and so this was very informative for me as well. Okay, so lesbian, of course, a female homosexual. Okay, a female who experiences romantic love or sexual attraction to other females. And this is something that I want parents to think about, because, sometimes when it comes to our children, and I know I always go back to children because, that's one of my areas of specialization, adolescent treatment. And sometimes parents, when their kid discloses to them that they are gay or lesbian, and they immediately freak out and they feel like, oh my God, I didn't even know that my kid was having sex. A lot of times the kid is still a virgin. And so they're like, I didn't say I was having sex. I said I was lesbian. I didn't say, why are you assuming that I'm having sex? And so that's something to keep in mind, that, a person can identify as gay or lesbian. Do not assume that that means that they are actually having sex. Now, on the other side of it, a lot of times I have parents who will dismiss it after that and say, well, if you ain't had sex, how you know what you are? You don't know what you are. You ain't had nothing yet. And it's like, okay, let's be sensitive to young people. They are just expressing what their attraction is to. And so we have to be careful to not reduce everything to the act of sexual intercourse. Like, just hear where your kid is at and where they are coming from. Do not dismiss it because they haven't had sex. Do not assume that they have had sex. Okay, gay is a term that primarily refers to just a homosexual person. It can be male or female, but usually when someone says gay, that term is applied to males, but it can be females. Okay, so LGB, bisexual. Bisexuality is romantic attraction, sexual attraction or sexual behavior towards both males and females, or romantic or sexual attraction to people of any sex or gender. Okay, and this can also be termed as pansexuality. Okay, pansexuality or omnisexuality is sexual attraction, romantic love, or emotional attraction towards people of any sex or gender identity. So pansexual people may refer to themselves as gender blind, asserting that gender and sex are insignificant and irrelevant. Okay, now there's transgender, which is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity differs from what is typically associated with the sex that they were assigned at birth. And so you have what you were assigned at birth, which is what you were born male and born female, but transgender individuals may identify with the other sex. Okay. Transsexual is to experience a gender identity that's inconsistent or not culturally associated with the sex that the person was assigned at birth. All right, two-spirit. This one is really interesting. I never heard of this before, but it's really interesting. Two-spirit is a modern umbrella term that is used by some indigenous North Americans to describe gender variant individuals. Okay, in their communities, specifically people within the indigenous communities who are seen as having both male and female spirits within them, which is really, I thought that was really interesting. Okay, questioning, which is just, a person is not sure. And a lot of times our young people, they are in the stage of questioning. And sometimes they'll say that it's because, they have not had actual sexual experiences. They have, sometimes young people will experience an attraction to a friend or to a teacher, and it can cause them to have that, curiosity. And so the questioning is just questioning one's gender, sexual identity, and sexual orientation, or all three of those. So if your kid comes to you and they're like, listen, I don't know, but I think I may be such and such and such and such, but I don't know. They're questioning. All right. Intersex is a variation in sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, or genitals that do not allow an individual to be distinctly identified as male or female. So now we're getting into the biology, a biological piece there. Okay. Asexual is non-sexuality. You know, there are individuals who are asexual. They do not experience an attraction, or they have low sexual interest and may not be interested in sexual activity. So that is asexuality. It's considered a lack of sexual orientation. Okay, ally, which I'm surprised this term is not more popular. An ally is a person who considers themselves to be a friend of the LGBTQ community. Agender, agender people, also called genderless or gender free, or non-gendered. These are people who identify as having no gender or being without any gender identity. This category includes a very broad range of identities. See, this is where we are getting into some of the issues that are arising around the use of pronouns and the elimination thereof. And, you know, because some people are like, I don't want to identify as male because I have male genitalia, or as female because I have female genitalia. And so I don't want to the he and the she. And so sometimes people struggle with, okay, how, what term do I use? How do I have a conversation without the use of pronouns? And it can make it difficult and a little complicated for people to get used to that. A lot of times with our young people, because young people can be very headstrong. And so when they are in a position where they are um, expressing their disagreement with the use of certain pronouns, this can be a struggle for parents, definitely a struggle for grandparents, because grandparents are like, I don't know how to talk to him. Oh, I just said him. I'm in trouble now. Yes. Okay. Gender queer is an umbrella term for gender identities that are not exclusively masculine or feminine. These are identities which are thus outside of the gender binary. Okay. And so this is a person who is kind of neutral in their presentation. They do not present as masculine or feminine. Bigender is gender identity where the person moves between feminine and masculine gender identities and behaviors, possibly depending on the context. Now, some bigender individuals will vacillate back and forth, and then others will predominantly be one or predominantly be the other. Okay, expressing two distinct male and female personas. Okay, so it's the identifying with two genders. So some go back and forth, some identify with both genders simultaneously. Gender variant, gender variance or gender nonconformity is behavior or gender expression by an individual that does not match masculine or feminine gender norms. So people who exhibit gender variance may be called gender variant, gender nonconforming, gender diverse, gender atypical, and may be transgender or otherwise variant in their gender expression, just the outward expression of it. Okay, so some intersex people may also exhibit gender variance. Pangender are people who feel that they identify with all genders. The term has a great deal of overlap with genderqueer because of its all-encompassing nature, presentation, and pronoun usage varies between different people who identify as pangender. So that is an explanation of LGBTTQQI AA plus pansexual, agender, genderqueer, bigender, gender variant, and pangender. Now, in doing some research into this, the research basically said it's okay if you do not know what all these terms mean, if you do not know what the whole acronym means. What is important is that you be open and receptive to an individual expressing themselves and identifying themselves as they want to be identified. You do not need to pretend as if you know what all these things mean. It's okay to just ask, and to be respectful. How do you want to be referred to? Something I've noticed professionally is in documentation that I am getting at times from insurance companies and from referral sources, that even in written documentation, the person is identifying, or saying what the pronoun is that they want to be recognized as. And so people are making it clear. It's okay though if you do not know, just ask. Carol, what are your thoughts?
Well, that's a lot to digest, Gerald, because I think that we're so in this country, we're so sexually bound up that we can't be open-minded. And but I agree with you. I mean, you have to meet the person where they are, not where you want them to be, because just your reality, even if we're not talking about sex, your reality is not necessarily the other person's reality, and you have to understand their reality and their perception and how their worldview and how they see themselves in that world. And it's important, if you're going to be a functional therapist, which I distinguish from dysfunctional, because therapists can be dysfunctional too. But Gerald's laughing, so I'll go on. If you're going to be
You're right, though. You're right.
If you're going to be a functional therapist, you have to know your own boundaries. And if you're uncomfortable dealing with someone the way that they are, you need to say to somebody, I'm having problems dealing with this. You need to talk to a supervisor or a colleague or someone. How do I deal with this? Tell me what to do. Or you need, if it has to come to that, you need to say, I'm not the best person to deal with this person, but to consider yourself all-inclusive and omnipotent, and therefore omnipresent and powerful, is ridiculous, because you can't be everything for everybody. And when you are open to the fact that I don't know everything and I'm not the perfect person, it reflects in your interaction with your clients, and it makes them more comfortable. When you come on as, hey, I'm God, or the next thing closest to there, and hey, I know everything and I got all the answers, then you have destroyed the therapeutic, the chances of a good therapeutic interaction, and the relationship goes in the toilet, because nobody comes to therapy wanting you to make them feel worse than they feel because they're there.
Right.
And that's what we do a lot of times. We make people feel worse than they feel when they're there. So it takes a lot this is a lot to digest. And I, as an old country girl, I want to, go back to the intersex thing. That one has been played down, but that goes across the board in all species, all mammals. It's not a horse or cow or a farm animal thing. It's across all mammals. So, and that's something that happens rarely, but that is how God, or whoever you feel created the world, intended it. And so it does happen, and it happens for a reason, I believe, so that we can understand that we have to deal with these things, and we have to deal with them as hopefully somewhat educated, and in our case, professional people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. One of the struggles, I'm glad that you mentioned that professionals have to um, know where they're at and be able to say that I may not be the best person to work with this individual, because it would be better to do that if a person is struggling, especially around the use of pronouns, than to do more harm. Because have I have known therapists who, for religious reasons, they struggled with this. And their perspective was, listen, he was born with a penis, he's a boy, and that's what I'm calling him. And I have to remind them, well, regardless of your personal and religious standpoint on it, because you're using religion as a part of your weaponry here, we also have to remember that the code of ethics says we start where our client is. Our clients have self-determination. And so I have to explain to them, like, you are imposing your views upon your client, which essentially is unethical practice. And so it would be better, if you cannot do this, for you to let the team know, I don't think that I am a good fit. And I have one therapist who said that where she was working, it has become so much of an issue that she was preparing to quit her job. And, and I'm like, okay, you're going to leave your job because you cannot handle that some young men want to be identified as female and some young females want to be identified as male. But they had very strong views on it and was like, it's too much. I'm getting tired of being called into my supervisor's office and da 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 da. And that's them imposing their agenda.
Well, Gerald, I can say one thing. When I grew up, people called it so and so coming out of the closet. I don't know why they use that terminology, but that was the terminology we used, coming out of the closet. But when my interpretation of what's going on now is when people with different sexual identities or proclivities make that announcement or share that with people, it's the homophobic people that come out the closet.
Coming out of the closet of homophobia. It does draw them out.
because it's a situation where you have to, and I think that it goes into context with all the other isms, like sexist and racist and blah blah this and blah blah. All the isms come out. It's just, and I think if you have one, you probably have more than one. So if you have problems with sexual identity issues, you probably have problems with racial identity issues and biracial and octoroon and quadroon and all this other stuff. And you have a whole lot of other issues, but this is one that you can just focus on and put a beam on and just say, okay, this is the issue. But I think that you have all kinds of other issues, and you have to be careful in our profession that you don't address your issues inside what's supposed to be the therapeutic setting.
Right. Something else that I have encountered is the opposite extreme, where the team has done a wonderful job of being accepting of a young person's identity, to the point that they go after those who are struggling with it. And by that, what I'm talking about is I have had cases where the parents were somewhere high and the grandparents were on the reunification plan. And so because the teenager had came in identifying as the opposite sex that they were biologically born under. So the team is like, okay, everybody needs to identify that this young person, even though she may have been born female, is living as a male. Which is wonderful. The problem is they then pressure me to rate grandma over the code. And what I want people to think about is it's wonderful that you have easily been able to make that transition from identifying this young person as, from female to male or male to female. But at the same time, I don't think we should handle a 70 or 80-some-year-old woman as if she's a bigot. She's old. And what I have found with some of these grandparents, and they end up reduced to tears, is they're like, this is new for me. I have known my grandchild as a female, for example, her whole life. Now the state is involved. I'm trying to get my grandchild out of foster care because, the parents are not able to take care of them. And now everybody's acting like I'm psychologically abusive because I am struggling to remember that to call her a he now, or to identify, and say that my granddaughter, who was my granddaughter for 16 years, and now everybody acts like I'm supposed to be able to immediately switch over and start saying my grandson, and I'm struggling. And so I remember one particular case where the whole team was raking this old woman over the coals and contacting me and telling me, you need to address this in these therapy sessions because she's being psychologically abusive by her not referring to her granddaughter as a grandson and as a he, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I did address it with her. She didn't have malicious intent. This woman was old. And what I have found, and I'm just going to be just in being totally honest, I myself make a smoother, easier transition if the person, when I meet them, they present at that time as whatever the gender identification is. It is harder when you have to make that shift. And so if you meet them, and that's what I had to explain to, the team, is okay, when you all met her, she was presenting as he, and that's why you're easily able to say he. This old woman has been saying she to her grandchild her whole life. Can we be patient? Because it is harder to make that switch when you have, in your brain, all you have known is one gender, and then you have to switch over to the other one. And they were harsh and insensitive with this grandmother, and harassing me to address this issue over and over and over in therapy. And what was interesting is the child said in therapy, this isn't an issue for me. I'm okay with my grandmother, you know, she still sees me as a she, and I understand that. So what happened is the adults, the professionals were making it an issue. The kid wasn't even making it an issue.
But,
and so it got ridiculous.
but that's where the hypocrisy and the homophobia come in. You know, it's easy to tell somebody to go out here and do this and do this and do that, but it's difficult to go out there, as the Native Americans say, and walk in their shoes and do this and do this, and then behind closed doors where you know you're not on display. Mm-hmm. And we take away, as one of our close colleagues says, your alphabets behind your name. When you just become Mary Sue without the blah 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 behind your name.
All them letters.
All them letters, yeah. So when you strip that off, some people, those letters become their armor. And when you strip that armor off, you get down to something that's bare naked and a lot of times ugly. And I think that you have to understand that it's easy to tell, you know, but that's a problem in therapy. That's as old as therapy, because we want to impose our ideas of how the world works on everybody. So, you know, and I think that makes it, and I'm not trying to be racist here, but I think that that's why it's very difficult for people of color to go into therapy a lot of times, because we're bearing that burden of being of color, and we're 9 times out of 10 we're poor. So we're poor, we're people of color, we're living in some type of low income neighborhood that's gotten a termination of ghetto. And then you go in here with this other issue. So you got all these issues, and you're going in here with someone that has all these ideas about how you should be. And, you know, this is the one they're going to focus on. But when they get through with this one, they're going to go to this one, and they're going to go to that one. They're going to. So you feel like, boy, when they get to getting beat up on this one, then they're going to go back to this one and this one and this. I can't go through this 4 or 5 times. And sometimes you just need to understand that everything is not supposed to be a certain way, and nothing is ever perfect. So you try to get the person from where they are to where they can be the best that they are capable of being and be comfortable with in the time span that you have to work with them. And then you hope that you planted some seeds, and those seeds will grow, and you know something good will come of it. But you know, I have disdain for all these people who, I had this person in therapy and we worked with them for 6 months and we did this type of therapy with them, and everybody that we worked with was successful. That's you know what lie, and I can't say that on.
Right.
I'm still a little bit of a Christian woman. I can't say that, but you know, so we need to be truthful. The first person you need to be truthful with is yourself, and know your limitations. And I think that's another limitation that you're talking about. You know, imposing this on someone else without knowing how you would live with that if it happened in your family behind closed doors and you had to live with it 24/7.
Right. Well, I am hopeful that as time goes by, that professionals will do a better job of holding themselves accountable for, as you said, making sure that clients do not leave more harmed and more injured than when they came in. And I'm not just talking about therapists. I'm talking about, you know, guardians ad litem and caseworkers and nurses and psychiatrists, you know, all these people who become a part of a young person's world, who oftentimes are questioning and they're experiencing some insecurities and they're worried about rejection. And the last thing they need is for the adults to be complicating the situation more. And so, thank you, Carol, once again for joining me on the show. So glad to have you here. And you're gonna have to come back.
Now I can go to sleep.
Now you can go to sleep.
It's too early for me to go to sleep. I don't stay up all night like you.
Because let me tell you, I'm functioning on about 3 hours of sleep.
Well,
So,
but see, when you're a new parent into those first 4 or 5 years, you're going to function on that kind of sleep. And then when that child gets to be a teenager, you're going to function on that kind of sleep again. Trust and believe me.
yes,
So
yes.
get used to it. Quit complaining.
Well, and actually, because, my wife and I, we've been, we were foster parents and adoptive parents. I'm more used to the teenager schedule than the baby schedule, but I'm adjusting.
Well, as my grandmother used to tell my parents, that was you once, and I had to put up with you. So
right.
live with it. Live with it. Enjoy it. It only
Right.
nothing lasts forever. Everything.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Joining us for our show. Remember, worry about nothing and pray about everything. Thank you, and God bless.